I was walking home through the Lower East Side that morning, just after sunrise, when I saw something small and motionless between two trash bags. At first, I thought it was a torn toy, just another piece of city litter. But then it moved. A faint, trembling breath lifted its side, and I froze. When I crouched closer, I saw him, a brown French Bulldog puppy, no older than 4 months, his fur matted with filth, ribs sharp under thin skin. He tried to lift his head, but it dropped back onto the wet pavement with a dull thud. I'm David, a 33-year-old paramedic who's seen my share of pain, but nothing prepared me for that tiny body shaking from cold and fear. Around us, the city kept moving, cabs honking, steam rising from grates, people stepping around puddles like nothing was wrong. I took off my jacket and wrapped him gently, feeling the fragile thump of his heart against my palm. He smelled like garbage and rain, but underneath that, there was something else, life hanging by a thread. When I lifted him, he whimpered, a soft sound that cut right through the noise of New York. I whispered, "You're okay, little guy. I've got you." His eyes fluttered open for a second, cloudy, confused, and in that brief look, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I didn't know his name, or if he'd even make it through the hour, but I knew one thing as I carried him toward my car. I wasn't leaving this city street without him. He was still barely conscious when I laid him on the passenger seat, wrapped in my jacket. Every bump in the road made his body twitch, and I kept one hand steady on his side, feeling that faint rise and fall. The rain had started again, thin, cold drops tapping against the windshield as I drove through the chaos of Manhattan traffic. I turned on the heater full blast, praying it wouldn't be too much for him. His paws were stiff, like tiny frozen stones. At a red light near Houston Street, I whispered, "Hang on, buddy. We're almost there." I didn't even know where there was yet. Every clinic I passed was closed or packed, but I remembered a small emergency vet on Delancey that stayed open for overnight cases. When I parked, I rushed him inside, my shoes squeaking on the tile floor. The woman at the front desk looked up, startled. "Is he breathing?" she asked. I nodded, though my throat was tight. The vet, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, came out from the back. He took one glance at the puppy and said, "Let's move, quickly." They placed him on a metal table, clipped a tiny oxygen mask over his nose, and wrapped him in warm towels. I stood there useless, hands trembling, rainwater still dripping from my sleeves. For a moment, all I could do was watch his chest, slow, uneven, fighting for air. New York felt impossibly loud outside, but in that small room, the world had narrowed to one fragile sound, the faint rhythm of a puppy trying to stay alive. The night blurred into the steady hum of machines and the soft shuffle of the vet's shoes. I sat on a plastic chair beside the metal table, watching the tiny rise and fall beneath the towel. The oxygen mask fogged lightly with every weak breath he managed. He was so small under all that fabric, just a trembling shape with patches of brown fur showing through the damp folds. The vet came back once to check the IV. "Severe dehydration," he murmured. "Malnutrition. He must have been out there for days." I nodded, though my stomach twisted at the thought. Days alone in this city. How had no one seen him? Or worse, how many had seen him and kept walking? Around 3 a.m, the clinic grew quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows streaked with faint city light. I leaned closer, whispering to him like he could hear me. "You're not trash, you hear me? You're not something someone threw away." My voice cracked. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe something deeper. Something about the way he still fought to breathe, even when it looked hopeless. When his eyes fluttered open again, they found mine. Just for a moment, dull, tired, but aware. I could have sworn his paw twitched toward me before slipping back into stillness. That tiny motion felt like a promise, a fragile signal that he hadn't given up yet. I sat there until dawn broke over the city skyline, waiting for the first sign that he might make it through the night. Morning light crept through the blinds, pale and cold. The puppy was still breathing, barely, but still. The vet had gone home for a few hours, leaving me with quiet instructions and a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold. I hadn't slept. Every time his breathing hitched, my heart jumped. I kept touching the towel to make sure he was warm enough, that his pulse hadn't slipped away. When the first rays of sunlight hit the window, I saw him more clearly. His coat wasn't just brown, it had shades of caramel under the grime and one small patch of white under his chin. His ribs pressed sharply against his sides, but his face, even gaunt, looked gentle. I whispered, "Hey, city boy," and for the first time, his ear twitched. The vet returned mid-morning, surprised to find me still there. "He's a fighter," he said softly, checking the IV. "If he made it through the night, he has a chance." That word, chance, lodged in my chest like a fragile spark. He showed me how to feed him small drops of water with a syringe. The first time I touched it to his lips, nothing happened. The second time, he swallowed. Just once, but it was enough to make me choke up. I laughed quietly through tears I hadn't noticed were falling. Outside, the city was waking up. Horns, footsteps, the smell of bagels and wet pavement. Inside, I watched a 4-month-old brown French Bulldog take his first sip of water in who knows how long, and in that small act, I felt the first real sign of hope. By the second day, the fear began to loosen its grip. The puppy, still weak, still wrapped in those soft towels, had started to move a little. When I reached out, his nose brushed against my hand, and for the first time, I felt the faint warmth of his breath against my skin. It was like the city outside faded, and all that mattered was that fragile connection between us. The vet let me hold him for a few minutes that afternoon. His body was light as a bundle of cloth, trembling slightly, but when I tucked him against my chest, he sighed. A quiet, human-sounding breath, full of exhaustion and trust. His fur still carried the smell of dirt and iron, but under it, I could sense the faint sweetness of life returning. "You're stronger than you look," I murmured. He blinked up at me, eyes heavy and half-clouded, but there was something there now, a flicker. When I placed him back on the blanket, he tried to lift his head, wobbling like a newborn. He didn't manage to stay up for long, but he tried, and that effort felt monumental. The vet smiled when he saw it. "He's turning a corner," he said. I nodded, though my throat tightened. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed to hear that. As I sat there, the city lights began to shimmer through the clinic window, reflections dancing on the stainless steel. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded into silence. I looked down at him. This little brown French Bulldog, still fighting, and whispered, "If you make it, you're not going back to those streets. I promise." By the third day, he was standing, barely, but standing. His legs wobbled like thin sticks under a coat still patchy and dull, but he didn't give up. I remember crouching beside him, one hand hovering just in case he fell. "Easy, little man," I whispered. "You've got this." He stumbled forward, paws slipping on the towel, then caught himself again. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. The vet smiled from across the room. "He's got spirit," he said, and I couldn't help but grin back. Spirit. That's exactly what he had, hidden beneath all that dirt and fragility. His ribs still showed, his fur still clung in clumps of grime that soap hadn't yet lifted, but his eyes had changed. They were awake now, alert, curious, uncertain. That evening, I brought him to my apartment for the first time. I'd cleaned a small corner of my living room, laid down soft blankets, and set out a bowl of warm water. He sniffed the air, trembling, unsure of the quiet. The city hummed faintly through the window, distant horns, the soft rhythm of footsteps on the street below. When I placed a tiny piece of boiled chicken in front of him, he hesitated, then took it gently from my fingers. It was the first time I'd seen him eat on his own. I didn't realize I was smiling until my face hurt. That night, he curled into the crook of a blanket beside the couch, eyes fluttering shut. For the first time, he wasn't shivering. For the first time, he looked like he believed he was safe. By the end of the week, he started following me from room to room, still a little clumsy but determined. His paws clicked softly on the hardwood floor, his tail giving these uncertain little wags, like he was testing the idea of happiness. I'd never thought a sound so small could make an apartment feel alive again. Bath time was another story. The first time I turned on the water, he froze, eyes wide, body stiff as a board. I crouched down beside the tub, letting the water run warm over my fingers. "It's okay," I murmured. "Just water. Not the rain, not the street." Slowly, I lowered him in. He trembled at first, then relaxed as I cupped the water over his back. Brown and caramel fur began to show beneath the gray grime, soft and glossy where the dirt washed away. The drain carried away the last traces of the city that had almost killed him. When I wrapped him in a towel afterward, he leaned into my chest, eyes half closed. His breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. For a long time, I just sat there on the bathroom floor with him pressed against my heart, listening to the rhythm of our breaths sinking. Later that night, as he dozed beside me on the couch, I looked at him and said softly, "You need a name." His ear twitched, and somehow it felt like he was listening. "You made it through the rain, huh? Let's call you Milo." He lifted his head, blinking at me, then yawned. Tiny teeth, soft tongue, and laid it back down. It fit, Milo. The name felt right the moment I said it. It carried a softness, a warmth that matched the new spark in his eyes. By the next morning, he seemed to recognize it. When I called Milo, his ears perked and his head tilted, as if he was trying to remember what that sound meant. Each day, he grew a little stronger. The bones beneath his skin began to fade under a thin layer of muscle, and the dullness in his fur was giving way to a healthy sheen of caramel and brown. He'd begun exploring the apartment, sniffing every corner like he was mapping his new world. His favorite spot was the window ledge. He'd climb onto it, small paws balanced carefully, and watch the city below, the taxis, the people, the rhythm he'd once been lost in. Sometimes, when he saw another dog pass by, his tail wagged uncertainly, like a memory half forgotten. Feeding time was our quiet ritual. He'd sit patiently, eyes bright, waiting for the bowl to touch the floor before diving in. Watching him eat now was like watching victory itself, every bite a step away from that cold street corner. One evening, as the sunset turned the skyline gold, he brought me one of his toys, a little squeaky bone I'd bought at a pet shop. He dropped it at my feet and looked up, waiting. It was the first time he'd invited me to play. I tossed it gently, and he chased it, clumsy and joyful, the sound of his paws echoing across the floor. For the first time I realized, Milo wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Weeks passed, and the apartment no longer felt like a quiet refuge. It felt like a home. Milo followed me everywhere now, his steps quick and sure, his caramel and brown coat gleaming in the light that spilled through the windows. Every morning, when I put on my boots for work, he'd sit by the door with a look that said, "Take me with you." I couldn't resist for long. Our first walk together through the city felt surreal. The same streets that once nearly took his life now echoed with the patter of his paws and the soft jingle of his collar. People turned to smile, and a few stopped to pet him, their eyes lighting up when he wagged his tail. "He's a sweetheart," one woman said, and I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. We walked past the very alley where I'd first found him. The trash bins were still there, the smell of rain-soaked concrete the same. But Milo didn't hesitate. He sniffed once, then looked up at me, tail wagging. It was as if he'd made peace with that place, claimed it as part of his story, but no longer his home. That night, back in the apartment, he climbed onto the couch beside me and rested his head on my leg. I ran my hand through his soft fur, clean, warm, alive. Outside, New York buzzed and shimmered, but inside, it was quiet. Milo had stopped trembling in his sleep. He dreamed now, tiny paws twitching, soft whimpers that sounded almost like laughter. Watching him, I realized I wasn't rescuing him anymore. We were rescuing each other. It's been 3 months since that morning on the sidewalk, and sometimes I still catch myself staring at him in disbelief. Milo sprawls across my couch now, snoring softly, his caramel and brown fur warm against the blanket. The sharp ribs I once saw pressing through his skin have filled out. His eyes, once dull and clouded, shine with a kind of joy that feels contagious. Every morning, he greets the day like it's a miracle, spinning in circles when I grab the leash, barking once before we head out into the streets. New York looks different with him beside me. The noise isn't as harsh, the cold wind less biting. The same corners that used to feel lonely now hum with something softer, something alive. We stop for coffee most mornings at the corner cafe. The barista keeps a jar of dog treats by the counter now. She calls him Mayor Milo. He sits proudly by my feet, chest puffed out, tail sweeping the floor. People recognize him. "That's the little guy from the rescue, right?" they say. And I nod, always smiling, always humbled. Sometimes, when we walk home at dusk, I glance at his reflection in the shop windows. Bright eyes, clean coat, a confident stride. And I think about that trembling, broken puppy I carried through the rain. He's not that lost soul anymore. He's the heartbeat that fills my home, the reason I listen for silence before sleep, just to hear him breathing beside me. I found him on a cold New York morning. But the truth is, somewhere along the way, he found me too.